Welcome to the Agents of Innovation podcast, where we feature conversations with entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and artists. Okay, welcome back to another episode of the Agents of Innovation podcast. I am your host, Francisco Gonzalez, and we have with me here a previous podcast guest. If you've been listening for at least 6 years, you've probably heard him before. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see him here in the flesh, and that is my good longtime friend, Matthew Farrar. Matthew, welcome back to the Agents of Innovation podcast.
Thanks, man. It's awesome to be here with you again, and exciting to have new stuff to share with you.
Yeah, that's exciting. So for some that maybe don't know, I wrote this book and I published it last year. The American Dream is a Terrible Thing to Waste. The subtitle is 100 Agents of Innovation Share Their Fearless Journeys in Today's Economy. And there's a chapter in there about you and your previous co-founder and business partner, Joe Clements, because you guys talked to me, I think it was about 6 years ago now, on the Agents of Innovation podcast. And we, we discussed what you were doing then. And you were maybe, I think at that point, 2-3 years into SDS, Strategic Digital Services. Now you're doing a lot of other things, Matt, and we're going to get into that. Before we do, one of the things I want to remind the audience is, of course, you may be listening to this on Spotify or Apple. If you are, please subscribe and please consider writing a review for us as well. All of those help boost the podcast. If you're listening and you want to watch this, you can go over to YouTube and just put in Agents of Innovation podcast into YouTube, and you can find this there. Also, you might see behind me a banner. This is the Agents of Innovation podcast. It's been the podcast name for, 9 years. I think we're almost going on 9 years now with this podcast. But of course, I also started a company almost 3 years ago called Fearless Journeys, where we not only allow you to listen to great entrepreneurs like Matthew Farrar, but you actually can then come into the conversation with us. Matthew actually just recently led a live leadership session for members of the Fearless Journeys community on how to be better storytellers in solving problems. And so that was really fantastic. And so we get the direct interaction, but also we do a lot of other great things, like go on group trips. I'm prepping right now. Maybe by the time you listen to this or watch this, I may have already be there. And that's in Argentina for our group trip there in April. We're going to be doing an adventure to Dewshore, Pennsylvania in late July, where we're going to challenge our members and travelers with us to get out of their comfort zone. And so go to fearlessjourneys.org to find out more about that. And we got some exciting group trips on the horizon we'll be announcing soon as well, including one to Peru later this November. So stay tuned for that. And so you can sign up for everything at fearlessjourneys.org. /subscribe to get on our free newsletter and learn all about this stuff. So make sure you do all of that. And now let's get back to our program here with Matthew Farrar. And Matthew, you are, okay, just to reintroduce you to the audience, I mentioned Matt had been, the co-founder and CEO, I forget the title.
Presidency, yeah. When you run a business, your title is not super important to you. You're just getting things done. So I had a co-founder, and fortunately, we had a great teamwork at SDS.
Yeah. So SDS, and he did some great things with marketing and communications there. We'll get into that a little bit. But he is now a filmmaker, entrepreneur, and adventurer who develops stories that serve a purpose. So across many of his endeavors, he's been part outdoorsman, part tour guide, part tech geek, and full-time passion-driven storyteller. And so he's had, a decades-long approach in this marketing background, uncovering compelling content that produces deep understanding and commanding calls of action. And through his lens, Matt has connected audiences with stories that inspire audiences and build brand loyalty. And for those that may not know Matt, he's also from Florida's Gulf Coast, Panama City, but has lived now for 20 years in Tallahassee, Florida. And also, side note, we were once housemates as well when I was living in Tallahassee. But one of the things we also share is a passion for travel. We're going to get into all of these fun things. But Matt, first, it's been great over the last 20 years seeing you to kind of in the political lobbying space. And you were doing a lot of great work then when I first kind of got to know you. And then again, about a decade or so ago, you got into this strategic digital marketing space. We had a whole podcast about that, as I referenced. And now you're doing something else. So I wanted to ask you, tell me a little bit about the evolution and how you didn't just change kind of jobs. You've in some ways changed total careers, even though there is some linkages and some skill sets that you've transferred. But tell us how the evolution from each of these kind of three types of careers has gone over the last 20 years.
For sure, man. Thanks. It's awesome to be on the podcast with you again, and to give you an update of everything that's going on in my world. So I have kind of this weird combination of jobs and a career path. So I mean, actually, you and I first met when I was still a student at FSU, right? Even before I was working in the lobbying world. But like you said, that's how I got kind of my first experience into politics was state level campaigns and state level lobbying. So I worked on a House campaign while I was still in school, really enjoyed it, got bitten by the political bug, and had the opportunity to work part-time at a lobbying firm while I was still at FSU. So doing things like taking notes in committee meetings, pulling amendment packets and stuff from Document Center. There wasn't a lot of coffee fetching, fortunately. It was an internship that I actually got to learn a lot about, so much so that, when I was done at FSU, they made me an offer to come on board full time to be a lobbyist. I knew our clients, I knew the issues, I knew the members, the legislators. So it was just kind of a no-brainer all around. So I did that for 6 or 7 years, and along the way taught myself some useful skills for that. And that's graphic design, web design, right? Being able to develop, high quality handouts for our clients, or, quickly put up landing pages for a campaign. And so those were just skills I learned along the way. And honestly, they were mostly focused on a side hustle, right? I was fortunate enough that I had a boss that encouraged me to do side hustle projects. So I got to work on some campaigns and got to work on some other projects that brought some side hustle revenue. But at the end of the day, it became something I was really passionate about. The design, the creativity, all of that was something that just really, really fueled me. And so back in 2014, I had the chance to start SDS with my friend Joe Clements. And Joe and I just had lunch the other day, and got to catch up a little bit, which was nice. But Joe and I, got in the trenches and built a business together. And it was, I think we talked about this in the first episode of the podcast, but it was difficult early on, right? It was a struggle. It was not easy. And we figured out how to do it and figured out how to correct the problems that, every business inevitably has when it starts. And we learned a lot, and we turned it into, one of the fastest growing privately held companies in America. We were, fortunate to make the Inc. 5000 list a few times, as high as number 638 in 2019 as the 638th fastest growing company in America. So, we figured it out, right? And along the way, got to learn, just absolute cutting edge marketing techniques. We built a video studio, just all these creative things that kind of stacked for me. What that resulted in was a very successful business, right? But one where I was doing a lot of business work, right? A lot of like contracts and travel that wasn't related to fun client projects, that was related to meetings and paperwork and, signing things. And so, that's the things that come along with a successful business, right? Those are important. But for me, those were not super fulfilling. So I made a decision a few years ago to take not all, but most of my shares out of SDS. I'm still an owner and still proud and happy to be a part owner, but decided to go out and create my own original content for a living and create my own projects. And so that's what I've done. Like you said, I've built a production company. We've got a few projects out there. We did a documentary last year about the trucking industry in Florida. And I have an original nonfiction series that I'm currently working on called Wild Escape. And the latest entrepreneurial endeavor is we have an app that I'm excited to share some details about with you kind of for the first time.
Yeah, so this is really exciting, all this stuff. So it's kind of interesting listening to you because you mentioned that along the way of when I think when you were doing lobbying work, and then later, as you transitioned into doing the digital marketing firm, SDS, you had learned, some graphic design and some video editing and all these sorts of things, kind of teaching yourself, maybe learning by doing in a sense, but also using the skills and maybe the things you weren't so good at the beginning, but maybe doing a little bit more repetitiously and being able to say, hey, now I can translate these skills into maybe starting a digital marketing firm, right? And also, you sounded like you also had some either clients or potential clients or people, relationships you had built in Tallahassee and around the state that you knew that could use the services of this potential company, which ended up becoming, like you said, one of the 638th fastest companies in America, SDS. So you were able to identify a lot of these things and build these skills and translate it to that work. And so I
Very
listening to
fortunate
what you
to hit
just
the market at the right time, right? So, I mean, and that was intentional, but especially with the kind of political and governmental affairs space that we worked in early on in the company in 2014, right? That was just taking off. So, everyone was still wowed by what the Obama campaign had done in 2008 and 2012. So, we were still trying to convince people when we started the company to give us $500 a month to spend on Facebook ads for them, right? And that was a really big ask and a really big thing we had to convince them. So you're like, why would you spend $500 a month on Facebook to tell people to see my page? So there was the whole evolution of society and culture that was happening at the same time we were building this business where even people in generations older than we were starting to recognize the value in digital media. And this was about the time, in that stretch of years where I think that we really needed to stop calling it digital media and just refer to it as media, right? Because it's like digital first primarily in most cases at this point. So it's just media now, but now that's the standard, the expectation, right? You're not going to launch your company without a Facebook page and an Instagram page. You're not going to launch your company without making sure your branding is consistent across all platforms. These are things that, are very consistent and well known now, but back in 2014, right, we were still trying to convince people, yes, you should be on Facebook, because they didn't want to. They were afraid everybody was just going to complain, which they did, and it was going to be a negative only existence.
Well, it is interesting, right? Because there's so many types of social media we have to be aware and intentional about now. Maybe it's LinkedIn, maybe it's Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, maybe, and all these sorts of things. The list goes on. So what's interesting, though, when you talk about that, I also just listened to you give a presentation on story-driven solutions and telling your story, and then also being able to use all these platforms in a very intentional way so that you tell your story. Maybe it's on a website, but also maybe it's through all the different social media that you're doing. Maybe it's newsletters you're writing, whatever it is, through email. So can you tell maybe us a little bit about the importance of telling your own story to people, and then how to basically effectively doing that with all these communication tools we have today?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great question, man. And look, one of the things that's interesting about how to tell your story and what your brand is in 2024, and I think I said this on the webinar the other night, is something you have to consider now that you didn't have to consider 10 or 20 years ago is not just what your brand looks like, right? You have to consider what your brand sounds like. And it's no better example than what we're doing right now in a podcast, right? Most people are going to experience this podcast in their ears only. They're not going to see you and I in the video. If you see us, hey, we're glad you're here too. But a lot of people are going to experience this in their ears only. So what your brand, i.e. you, the host, and the music, all of the things that go into your production, what your brand sounds like is equally, if in this case, not more important than what it looks like. So that's one of the biggest shifts I think we've seen in the media landscape in the last few years. But I mean, let's talk about storytelling for a second, right? We talked about this in the storytelling presentation, but essentially anything that you're ever hooked by, anything you're compelled to keep looking at, keep watching, keep listening to, whether it's 3 seconds into a TikTok video or your favorite novel, has hooked you because it's telling a story, right? And that story is sometimes really, really short. You got to get them in 3 seconds on TikTok so that we know that they'll stay. And sometimes you get 1,000 pages to tell that story, right? It just kind of depends on the context. But for the most part, what I don't think a lot of people ever make it to the stage of is choosing to tell their own story, right? They let other people tell the story for them. They let other people define, who they are, what they do. And so that's, I think, kind of the underlying core belief of all of this is like, you need to take back the ownership rights to tell your own story first and foremost. And that's whether you're the brand, whether you're working on your business, whether you're the face of a nonprofit, like you can stretch this to a bunch of different places. Sorry, I don't mean to ramble, but I think it's incredibly important that, storytelling is an integral function of what we do, because it's how people perceive you, right? And so when we're intentional about how we tell the story about what we do, when we're intentional about how we show the story of what we do, it helps capture the emotions that you want people to feel. And if you're not thinking about, when you're making any content, right? I mean, and I'm, upload your photos of your puppies or your kids or whatever. I mean, that's fine. You don't need to think a lot about those. But any kind of content that you're uploading for a purpose, right? Whether it's a business purpose, where you're trying to get people to sign up for your newsletter, whether that's you're trying to get donations for something, any content you're creating for a purpose, for the most part, should tell a story, right? And if you're going to tell a story, you need to think about how you want the people to feel that are going to experience that story, right? Do you want them to feel sad? Do you want them to feel happy? Do you want this to be a bright moment in their day? Do you want this to be a moment that stops and makes them think? So how do you want that audience to feel? And the only way you can answer that question is by knowing your audience, right? You got to know who your audience is now, and you need to know who the audience is that you want to talk to. Because a lot of times those are two different things, right? My Facebook audience is, 5 years ago, largely made up of my friends and family, right? It is, with pages that I've created and stuff I've built over time, a little bit broader now, right? So here's a great example of something that was brought to my attention for the first time as a result of this explosion in new media. So I put out a TikTok video 6 months ago. And I'm terrible at putting out my own content, right? It's like the cobbler's children have no shoes. I'm constantly advising someone else on what they should be doing and never getting to make the stuff that I want to make most of the time. But this day I got to make something that I really wanted to make. So I went down to St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuge to shoot some content about controlled burns in forests. Right? Why they're important, why controlled burns help keep forests healthy, why they're good for the environment, all of those things. So I shot a video. It actually went pretty much exactly like I wanted it to. I was really happy with the outcome. And it got a lot of response on TikTok. What it got response for a lot, though, that I had no idea was going to be a thing is, oh my God, you have the largest hands I've ever seen. Never in my life has someone said that to me. And I wasn't offended. It just was completely took me aback. And then it just started echoing, right? The comments were, oh my God, I know. Have you seen how huge his hands are? Like, it just, and I talk a lot with my hands, just like I'm doing right now. So, they were waving and flapping all over the place. Great example, right? I've been doing things on camera for at least 2 decades and never had someone notice the size of my hands before. But man, 5 minutes on TikTok and I start talking, everybody, what? It's going to expose things that you never thought were there, in good ways and bad ways, but also it's going to give you opportunities, right? Like I just leaned into that and started going back and forth with people in the comments. I didn't take offense to it. I just thought it was funny. And that was great for engagement. So I say that to say funny. that ended up being a story about me, even though I was originally making a story where I was playing a character, right? This was like a little skit I was doing on TikTok. Yeah.
It is kind of funny how things can translate online or things like that. And maybe TikTok, maybe the kind of user that uses TikTok, these are the kind of things they like to comment on and things like that. Who knows? But it's also
the user that uses TikTok, right, is like half of America. Like, it's not a specific demographic anymore, other than it's not very heavily used in 65 plus age groups, but like more than half of America is a TikTok user at this point. Like, it is a standard, and brands and obviously the United States Congress still wants to treat it like it's it's this scary new thing that hasn't been around and on people's phones for a decade, and just some cases in its previous app name. So it's just kind of hilarious to watch this nonsense play out and watch, the government. The government can't do anything, but it has managed to band together in the last few weeks to get a TikTok ban done. That was the one thing we could get just exceptional bipartisan cooperation on. So that tells you everything you need to know about what level of information TikTok is bringing to the masses.
So Matt, speaking of government, let's get to this, because you've got a lot that I want to go back to here, which you mentioned with some of the film work you're doing and everything. But I know there's something here you want to preview.
Yeah.
And it has a little bit something to do with government. I think it has a little bit something to do with AI. Tell us a little bit about what you are getting ready to explore unleashing here.
Sure. So, I mean, I talked a little bit about, kind of my entrepreneurial journey. And I think one of the things I've realized over the last few years is I really am an entrepreneur, right? And I didn't just like accept that title because like I make businesses and sometimes they succeed, right? Which kind of feels like how some people stumble into that title. But I feel like at this point, I really own it because that's the part I enjoy, right? I enjoy the early stages. I enjoy the creation. I enjoy the building of the business. I want the business to be successful for any number of reasons. But once it's successful, like, then I want to build something else. And that can be a challenge in some situations. But I mean, the more I lean into just being an actual straightforward entrepreneur, the better off it is. So I have, like we talked about, this kind of weird career that's, pathed around similar things, but all in different sectors. All right. So as a lobbyist, I worked in environmental policy and healthcare policy. We worked for big, Fortune 100 companies and little tiny mom and pop businesses and trade associations and pro bono nonprofits and kind of everywhere in between. So I've seen a lot of different things in government. One of the explosions we've seen in technology the last few years, but particularly in the last 6 months, is artificial intelligence, right? You can't open a newspaper, if you actually get a newspaper, or look at an online news source now without seeing something about AI, right? Like AI is either going to destroy the world, or it's going to take everyone's jobs, or it's going to do both of those things, or it's going to be the best thing ever, right? Like everything's an extreme. But the reality is that AI is extraordinarily useful, and it's creating really big opportunities in the startup space right now. It's very sexy. It's kind of the buzzword or the sexy term in both startup world and tech world at the moment. But that being said, the reason for it is because it's so damn powerful, right? It's because it can do so many things. So there's kind of two tiers of organizations that are, exploring AI at this point. One of them is, let's slap a plug-in on it, right? So we're going to slap a plug-in to say like, oh, you can now search with AI to do this, that, and the other. And that's good, right? Like that's using a tool. Like that's great. I'm not saying that's a bad thing by any means. But the other category of organization that's using AI is actually using it, more to its potential, right? Like they're actually building something that uses the AI's ability to be considerably faster than a human being, and using that power, right? So, that a couple years ago got my mind started because I noticed this problem where we have dozens of committee meetings in a state legislature or Congress that are happening simultaneously, right? And if you care about an issue, whether you're, working for a nonprofit or a think tank, whether you're an in-house governmental affairs person for a large company, or you're a small business owner who is going to be affected by policy changes, right? There's just an endless number of things to cover. You can't be in 20 committee meetings simultaneously. If you're a large lobbying firm, you might have a fleet of interns that you can deploy to those meetings. And every time something you care about gets talked about, they can text you, right? You can be in a certain number of meetings physically. You can watch things on the Florida channel, but none of these create a scenario where everything that's being said in government at any point, right? Nowhere even close to it. You have no idea if your company's being talked about, if issues you care are being talked about, if legislation specifically is being talked about, if it's not on the agenda, but it's still being discussed, which is a very real case. How do you know that it's there? And so this problem just kind of, kept occurring to me and churning in the back of my head is like, there's a way to solve this problem with artificial intelligence. And for a long time, I wasn't sure how to do it. And that was a combination of my lack of understanding and the sophistication of the technology not being there yet. But fortunately, I was in a place last year where everything just kind of fell into place to click, and we were able to build a new tool. And that tool, I think, is going to have some pretty considerable implications for both governmental affairs and governmental transparency going forward. So what we've built is an app that uses AI to, in near real time, transcribe and analyze the audio of government meetings, right? So whether that's 20 committee meetings simultaneously happening, a floor session, a regulatory hearing, a local government body, name it, it's fairly agnostic in terms of what type of meeting it is. But the system will, in near real time, transcribe and analyze and process what's being said in that meeting, and then tell the people that care about those things that it happened, right? So they'll notify, if you're Publix and you need to know every time the word Publix is mentioned in the Florida legislature, or every time the phrase grocery stores are mentioned in the Florida legislature, you would be a subscriber to this, and within seconds after it's mentioned in a meeting or on the floor, you would get a ping and a notification saying, hey, here's what was just said about Publix. Here's the context of it. Here's the previous few paragraphs, the next few paragraphs. Here's why it was said. Here's who said it. Here's what meeting it was said in. If you want to listen to it, go here. But like that information and the speed with which it's delivered is really, really important to a lot of people. Right now, you're kind of dependent on either seeing it live, right, or having someone see it live for you, going back and watching 20 different meetings later on, or hoping that some reporter or outlet writes a story on the thing you care about so that you see the news story and are able to digest information from it. And that's just not a very good way to get information. What AI is really, really good at doing is taking large amounts of information, whether that's written, whether that's audio, whatever it is, and parsing it down very quickly into digestible information. So what our app does is take a 2-hour-long committee meeting and in 30 seconds break it down to the sentence level for every sentence that was uttered. And it's super accurate, right? We're not talking about misspelling deer and deer. It understands from context how to use different words, right? It's AI. This is not just a simple find and replace situation. So it knows every sentence in that meeting that was uttered by speaker, right? It has a confidence rating for each word in the sentence and each sentence in the paragraph. But at the end of the day, what all of that gives us is a database of every word uttered in a government meeting on the record, right? So we can go back and process historical data, and we can process in near real-time data going forward for the Florida legislature, for the U.S. Congress. Again, it's fairly agnostic to the government body that it's working on. But long-term, what we're going to have, again, is a database of all on-the-record spoken words in government bodies. And I think if we are able to do that quickly and effectively, there's a very large market for international expansion. Because at that point, if you're able to say in near real time what's happening, in the legislature in the Philippines, that's going to affect market futures of a particular agricultural product in 2 weeks' time, knowing that within seconds is a really, really big deal. So beyond governmental affairs and corporate worlds, you have hedge funds, you have defense and intelligence industries that are going to be super interested in stuff like this. But for our product, long term, what we're building is something that a company will be able to go to and instantly answer a question about government via chat, right? Where can I find the statute to this, right? And that's not particularly difficult. But what I want it to be able to do is come in and say, hey, Promethea, here is my problem. I need a multi-state solution to solve this problem. Write the bill, write my talking points, and give me a strategy of which members I need to go talk to about this issue. And it's going to spit out in a PDF format that looks exactly like a House bill, because it has that context, what your draft legislation could be for each state, what your talking points should be for the media, a suggested media campaign if you need to run one, and what members you should target with it. And that's just using kind of the basics of what AI can do to empower people, to empower companies, to empower anyone that wants to know more about what's being said in our government.
That's amazing. I also clued in here that you have a name for this. Is it Promethea?
Promethea. Yep.
Promethea, and you would kind of call on it like you'd call on I'm not going to say it because my phone's right here. Like you call it SIRI.
So yeah, I actually think the end goal would be an audio interface where you could talk to it and it would talk back to you. But also a chat interface where I can say, Promethea, I need draft legislation to do this. And within seconds, it spit out, a 4-page bill. And to be clear, I'm not trying to take lobbyist jobs away from them. I'm trying to make their jobs much easier so that they can go work on, building relationships and designing strategies that work instead of having to edit the minutia of draft legislation or go back and forth on the fine points of what part of a statute should be edited with a company's in-house legal counsel.
Yeah. So on that note, Matt, I had on this podcast, episode 128, Parker Rex, we had a whole discussion about AI. He was talking about making AI work for you. Basically, he said we shouldn't be afraid of AI. We should use AI to, say, 10x ourselves, right? Figure out all the things you kind of do. And he wants to help people create AI agents for themselves so that the things you kind of do consistently day in, day out, figure out what that is, and then have AI do that stuff for you faster. So in this sense, you're basically applying that mentality to looking at all of these government meetings, government documents, everything that's being said and done and published by government. And so for the lobbyist or somebody who's working in that political process, this could 10x, maybe 20x themselves in terms of being able to be more efficient and also look, we all have just so much limited time, right? So being able to use that time now more strategically, I kind of look at it a little bit of how maybe Yahoo search or Google search, improved the time. I'm just old enough to have gone to the card catalog, even in college, I
had to learn how to use the Dewey Decimal System. No, I still had to learn how to use Dewey Decimal when I was in elementary.
Yeah, now now the kids, and including ourselves, we
don't
all
know
just
what
search
that
for things.
They don't know what cursive writing is. Now I sound like an old.
Yeah, so we just search for things on the internet, right? And we don't even have to go to a physical computer anymore. We could just pull out our phone, and actually, in some ways, we don't even have to type things anymore, right? We could just
screw you teachers who told me I wasn't going to walk around for the rest of my life with a calculator in my pocket.
Yeah, there we go. We got a calculator in our pocket. So this is great. Also translating that to people outside the work of government, right? The work of the lobbying. We the people sitting here on our couches. So I want to ask you, how can we benefit? How can we be beneficiaries? Just voters, people who are going on with their lives as entrepreneurs or 9-to-5 workers, whatever it is. We don't have time to pay attention to everything. I mean, government does a lot of things these days. We don't have time to pay attention to everything. How will this type of thing also help us?
Yeah, great question. I mean, and going back to kind of the base of it with AI, I think that, there's plenty of reason to be scared of it, right? It needs limits, and, the folks that are building it at the top level need to have very strict rules for how they're doing and governing that. So, it can be scary, but at the same time, it's here, it's already here, and a lot of people are using it. And at this point, if you're not using it, I don't care what your job is, if you're not using it to be better at your job, then you're missing out on an opportunity, right? Whether that opportunity is to buy back hours in your day, whether it's to, not have to hire an additional employee as quickly because you're able to save that money and put it into chat GPT queries. There's a lot of different ways that it can apply, but if you're not using it to make your work life at least a little bit better in some way, you're missing out on the boat. Specifically for Promethea, I think that, at a top level, what it's going to do, because we'll have the trends, right, of at each legislative body, what's being discussed, what's being most talked about each time. So I think from a top level, it's going to give some new accountability and insight into what people are talking about, right? Whether or not, for example, the government's talking about things that are even mildly relevant or interesting to the people that they represent. But the other thing that it's going to be interesting for is opposition research, right? So if there's a database now of every spoken word on the record in government, which, by the way, is not something that's unachievable right now, it's just a giant pain in the ass, right? And that's why opposition researchers charge a lot of money to go do this, because they're going to look through a video file that's 2 hours long to try to find one sentence that somebody said, because I've never said I'm against abortion, or that I'm like, well, actually here it is on January 1st at 3:08 p.m. So this is also a big deal in terms of accountability, I think, for elected officials. And not that accountability wasn't there before, but now it's a little more instantaneous. So just like the internet has made news and any sort of information a lot more real time around the world, this is going to make the things that government officials say a lot more real time around the world, which I think is good for people.
Yeah, and speaking of around the world, because we're talking in a Florida context, maybe in a U.S. Government context, but we are used to the separation of powers. We're used to democracy. We're used to all these sorts of things.
Most
In
days.
many places, most days, yeah, many places around the world, they're not, right. These are foreign concepts, like holding people accountable in government. Do you think this could have when I first heard you describe this, I was thinking, well, this could revolutionize the way people have a relationship to their government around the world, not just right here where what we're dealing with. So how might you forecast some of that?
Yeah, look, man, sunshine's the best disinfectant, right? Always has been, always will be. So the more we can shine light on what government is actually doing, whether that's a corrupt regime somewhere, whether that's a well-functioning democracy somewhere, I think that accountability is equally important to all ideologies and entities that exist on that spectrum, right? Like, people knowing more about their government is good, period. Government can do bad things in the shadows. It's a lot harder to do bad things in sunlight. And I'm not trying to sit here like a conspiracy theorist or anything else, but I mean, I think we've all agreed that over the past 3 decades, as things have come to light that we didn't know our government was doing, or that we didn't know programs that had existed, I think the general mentality of everyone is like, okay, yeah, it's time for a little more knowledge to be shined on some of these situations.
Well, I had Jamie Grant on this program also about
Yeah.
5 or 6 years ago, and we just had him back a few months ago, episode 131. He gave us the rundown this time.
He
It was
knows
a
some
catch-up
scary stuff
episode.
about cybersecurity too.
Yeah, and he was talking about being the chief information officer for the state of Florida. I'm sure he could have really used what you're about to unleash as well. With that, so speaking of unleashing, you call it Promethea. That's a Greek name. Can you give us a little maybe reasoning behind choosing that name?
I can, yeah. So it's a common theme in some of my entrepreneurial ventures. So my production company, where I film my original content, like my show, is called Ekdromi Productions. Ekdromi is the Greek word for journey, or adventure, or there's a couple different translations you can take of it, but that just really spoke to me. And why it speaks to me is because my wife is Greek. She's my favorite person in the whole world, and my son is half Greek as a result. So it holds a very special place in my heart, but it also just kind of represents to me, like, the path forward and the journey that I'm taking, as an entrepreneur and building businesses. So where I generate content or do commercial work is called Ekdromedia, which is just a play on the same word. And so when it was time to name the app, it just kind of had a working name of GovGPT for months. And eventually it came time to name it. It made most sense to keep with tradition. So, if you know anything about Prometheus and the origin of fire, there's a lot of cool imagery that goes along with that. And we've used some of that imagery in the branding as well as some of the feature names in the app. So it's it's just kind of fun, when you have a nice brand theme that you can kind of interweave throughout a project. It makes for a lot of little fun Easter eggs that you can do, right? So because we call it Promethea, the rapid transcription that it does to bring back, we call the fire scribe, right? So just fun little kitschy stuff that we get to do.
So Matt, you've worked in government, you've worked in digital media, you're now working to develop an AI app or tool to hold government accountable. A lot of this is digital. Sounds like a lot of machinery. But Matt, the other side of you is you like to get out in nature, maybe away from all these machines and noise and tech and all these sorts of things.
I like to bring all my toys, but I like my phone to have no reception, right? Like I like to have all my cool gear with me, but I don't want my phone to work.
Yeah, I was about to say, actually, you do bring the camera, so because that's how we get to get some insight. So tell me a little bit about, first of all, what kind of inspires you about with the kind of travel you do, getting into the outdoors and nature and things like that, and then what you're actually doing with things like your show, Wild Escape.
Sure. So, I mean, the outdoors for me is mostly about peace, right? It's mostly about mental health. It's mostly about enjoying and appreciating and being grateful for the world that we have and the things that are in it, the beautiful things that are in it. And sometimes that's by myself, and sometimes that's with my wife and son. And there's advantages to doing it both ways, right? I strongly encourage everyone to spend some time by themselves. It doesn't have to be, 10 miles deep in a forest, but just to spend some time in quiet reflection with nature. Whether you're a religious or spiritual person or not, I think you'll find a lot of value in just listening to the sounds of the world and what it has to offer you. But for me, it's mostly about peace, right? It's the woods, or a lake, or the ocean, or kayaking down a river. Those are the places I go to just be in the moment, right? That's the easiest way for me to consistently remember to just be in the moment. That's something I struggle with. So many hours of my day are spent sitting in this chair, either sending emails, writing code, or editing video. So it's really special to me when I get to take 3 hours and float down the Wakulla River and hang out with some manatees along the way. And that it brings me a lot of joy and peace. I think that it brings a lot of people that joy and that peace. And something that's important to me personally is helping people that haven't had the opportunity to experience that before. Experience it. There can be some intimidation to the outdoors, especially in communities or populations that have, typically had less access to the outdoors or aren't as familiar with it, right? If you don't have a functioning car, it's really difficult to get to your local state park or national park because for the most part, city transit does not run out to national parks. So like some of these problems that we don't think about if we are, privileged enough to just get in our car and go hop to our nearest park are not everyday experiences for all of our fellow Americans. So it's important to me that, some of the things we do are helping to, one, increase people's comfort with the outdoors and what they can experience in the world, but two, like just be a source of encouragement for people. So it's a passion for me. When I was setting out to think about what kind of content I wanted to produce and create, I knew that it needed to have something to do with that, because that's where my passion was, and that's where I felt like I could tell the best stories. And so after months and months and months of building a concept, we came up with the concept for Wild Escape. And so Wild Escape is a nonfiction TV show. It's hosted by me. It's an hour-long format series. If you've ever seen Running Wild with Bear Grylls on Nat Geo, the concept is very similar to that, except there are less helicopters, no bug eating. I'm not super interested in eating bugs, and it's focused on conservation instead of survival, right? It's important to me that the locations that we shoot in are accessible to most people. It is super cool to see the side of a glacier in, Iceland, and Will Smith and Bear Grylls like rappelling down the side of it. But the average person is going to have a pretty difficult time getting to that glacier in Iceland. Francisco may lead a Fearless Journeys trek there, so you might have a better opportunity to go. But for most people, that's not realistic. But they can get to Everglades National Park. They can get to, one of the thousands of beautiful destinations that we have in the United States that are all sorts of different ecosystems. So I want to expose those. And I also want to expose stories. We talked a lot about how important stories are to me. They're kind of at the core of everything I do at this point, right? Everything has to have an interesting story, and everything is about stories. So we're going to take a guest, just like on Running Wild, we're going to take a guest out into the wild. We're going to use that setting as the framework for a really in-depth, passionate interview. I'm not a journalist. I'm not trying to get them on gotcha questions, right? I'm not Oprah Winfrey. What I am trying to do is get them to talk about the things that drive them, the things that motivate them, why they care about the things they care about, what makes them get up in the morning, what keeps them up at night from going to sleep, right? And it's a lot of the things that you talk about, I'm sure, with other entrepreneurs on this podcast. But doing it in the raw format of, kayaking down a river or hiking up a difficult trail, or, getting your face slapped with branches as you're riding a side by side through the forest, right? These are all things that elicit raw emotions and raw stories and authentic conversations and genuine experience. And those are the things that I really want to capture with the show. So, our guests are going to be everybody from, musicians to business leaders to community leaders, right? It's not, I'm not focused on A-level Hollywood actors, although if any A-level Hollywood actors want to come on the show, like we'll take them. But who I'm focused on are people that are making an outsized difference wherever they are, right? If they're making an outsized difference in a huge community like Miami, that's awesome. But if they're making an outsized difference in a small little town that's right next to a state park too, that's super interesting to me. So I want to tell those stories, and I want to do it in a way that encourages my fellow humans to be able to find the peace and solace that I find in the outdoors.
I think that's great. And I hope your show inspires people to do that. One of the things we do in the Fearless Journeys community is we got a book club, and every 2 months we choose a new book to spend some time on. So a few months ago, I don't know if you've read this book yet, Matt. It's called The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter.
Mm-mm.
Well, it is right up your alley. Highly recommend it. And I'll even send you some of the little weekly summaries if you haven't seen them that we put out through the Fearless Journeys newsletter. But I think just read the book, listen to it however you want. But and maybe Michael Easter is one of these guys you should have come on there, because he's done some crazy outdoor adventure, including I think he spent 32 days in the Alaska backcountry with just like two guys. They were a little more in survival mode, but they weren't doing it for the camera.
That's full on survival mode for sure. That's a plane's coming to get you, or you're not getting rescued.
Yeah, actually, a plane took them where they were going, and I think if I remember the story, the plane could not fit all three of them with the pilot. Right. So Michael Easter was just sitting there in the middle of like nowhere, waiting for the plane to come back and just hoping it would, because he didn't have cell reception. He was just sitting on this like tarmac in the middle of nowhere. So pretty funny. But one of the things though in the book is he kind of goes through all these different comforts that we have today. We have, technology at our fingertips, right? We can go just a few minutes down the street and we have all the food we ever imagined in one store, and all the choices. And anyway, just go out. We have a nice, comfortable bed. We spend 90% of our day in climate-controlled environments. All these sorts of things, right? But one of the things he said, it's kind of like what you said. Getting out. We really are so disconnected from nature today. Even just the fresh air. I just said 90% climate control, right? So he advises that everybody. I'm going to do like a little, if I can remember this, about. He said all you need to improve your like mental health and even physical health is about 20 to 30 minutes a day in nature. And he says, when he says 20 to 30 minutes a day, I like to go out on morning walks to start my day. And usually I take this and listen to a podcast or an Audible book. But he says, you could do that sometimes, but at least for 20 or 30 minutes, literally don't take your phone. Just spend time with nature, no technology, no sound, no audio. So I'm trying to do that more and more as well. And then he says, and then about once a week, try to spend about an hour or two in nature. It could be a short hike, or just something interesting. Could be a bike ride. Maybe it's for me. Maybe it's playing tennis. Whatever it is, doing something outdoors. Again, away from technology as much as you can, maybe doing it with others, right? Maybe you're taking your wife and kid on a hike or kayaking down the river there. And then maybe once a year, he then goes and he kind of ups the level of challenge and says, take a 72 hour, and if you can, do something super challenging like that, So he talks about a masogi, and this is maybe something where like 50% chance that you're not going to succeed at whatever it is. It might be, as long as but he said the first rules don't die, don't put yourself in a position of death, right? But just do something really, really physically challenging or something like that. But either way, like 72 hours, maybe it's camping, whatever it is, like
Sometimes
get out
you accidentally do something physically challenging that you didn't set out to do when you're outdoors. And that's interesting too.
Yeah, that is interesting. So one thing is, I don't know if this is not really accidental, but what is it? This past August, I went out to Colorado to visit my brother, and he mapped it out. We did a 14er. It was Mount Quandary Peak, and challenging. But I've done volcano hikes in Guatemala. I've done at near the similar 13,000 altitude. But boy, maybe it was just that extra 1,000 foot altitude, and it was about a 6-hour round trip just up and back. But man, I'll tell you, I was about 2 hours in, and I was huffing and puffing at about every 10 minutes. I needed a 5-minute break. I was like,
"Yep,
okay, calm down." So, but by the end of it, I told my brother,
altitude will get you. I probably won't do any hikes in the future that go above a certain elevation without having an emergency like oxygen tank in my bag, just because like I know how quickly I can get winded at altitude because I live in Florida, right? Like I live at 0 feet sea level. So for me, it's just not even an option to not have rescue oxygen if I'm doing anything physically strenuous, at altitude.
Yeah, remember Michael Easter said, don't die, right? So
and look, I mean, you can train for it, right? Like I'm not training for I'm not training for Everest or Kilimanjaro or anything, but I mean, you can live in Florida and train for altitude. I just don't have time to constantly travel to altitude to train for it. My best bet is just making sure I don't die on the mountain somewhere.
Yeah, it is funny because a friend of mine who lives in Colorado said, "Oh, if you were out here for just a couple of weeks, at that." Also, it wasn't, Denver and Boulder are like 5,000 feet. You go to Breckenridge, it's 9,000. So
yeah,
my brother
if you're in the plains level cities in Colorado, you're fine. It's when you start driving up into the Rockies that you really start to feel it.
Well, before I read his book, I had heard Michael Easter on the Mike Rowe podcast, and so I was about to start reading this book, and as my brother and I are starting our hike, I said, "Oh, this guy, he talked about doing something challenging, and I'm glad we're doing this, and this is great." And then when we were about 5.5 hours, almost to the car, 6 hours, I said to my brother, I said, "Well, I had a great time today, but I never want to do this ever again." So. I was
there's a lot of good experiences that I feel that way about, right? Like I've done it, like it was incredibly challenging. I do not want to repeat that experience, but I'm thankful that I've done it and had the experience. And you're not learning something from everything, you're doing it wrong.
Not a 14K-er, but this is why this coming summer, Fearless Journeys, we are going to be doing this, getting people out of your comfort zone. We're going to, my friend Alexander McCoben, he was on one of our recent episodes here, episode 138. And he has this place, 50-acre place in Dewshore, Pennsylvania, very middle of nowhere, lots of hiking nearby, but we're going to set up a bunch of tents for people, camp outside. We're going to have at least 10 different challenges where we're going to gamify the whole weekend. It's going to be like a 72-hour thing.
Love it.
And every time people complete a challenge, they don't have to do everything, but every time they complete a challenge, they're going to get some points. So we're going to let someone walk away with the most fearless award for the Fearless Journeys community. And but one of the things we are going to basically require for everybody that comes, I mean, this will be foundational. You'll definitely won't win if you don't do this. And that is when people arrive, they will be giving up all of their screen time, including their phones, for 72 hours. And so that's going to be the first challenge, just to see if people can do it. They're going to be with other people. We're going to have some great times. We'll be looking at the stars in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, at night, having some bonfires. It'll be a lot of fun. So it's going to be, and also it's going to be something. It'll be family friendly. We'll have people have the ability to bring kids, and we do have a house that it's located with about 4 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms. So for those that really need some extra comfort or a good shower or something like that, we'll have those things available. But we're really going to try to push people, because I just think this is just kind of building on what you're saying. I mean, get out in nature, experience the world, get away from technology as much as you can. And I hope your show, Wild Escape, helps people to really be inspired by that, as well as maybe as much as I've been inspired by Michael Easter's book, The Comfort Crisis.
Yeah, look, I think sometimes it's just for a lot of people needing that little nudge, right? And maybe that nudge is like they need a friend to go out on that first hike with them, but maybe the nudge is just like they need the confidence to go do it. And so, whether it's my show or his books or anything else, I hope, just for the sake of humanity, that people are able to take advantage of what our world has out there, because it can legitimately help you. I mean, in so many different ways. Like, I mean, even forget the straight up physical benefits of fresh oxygen and the exercise and all of the things that will directly come as a benefit. The mental health benefits are just, I mean, they're numerous, right? The reflection period. I think it's very important that everyone, whether or not you're religious, spend time in meditation, right? And just intentional reflective thought. And outdoors is a really easy place to do that, because there's very few distractions if you want there to be. And look, sometimes I hike through the woods and I have AirPods in and I'm jamming out to some 80s tunes while I'm walking down the trail, right? But other times on the same hike, I have nothing in my ears and I'm just enjoying the sounds of the woods. And that's when, I noticed the deer 20 feet away that I didn't see. So there's no right or wrong way to do it. I think the right way to do it is just a way in which brings you joy and peace and comfort and appreciation for our world.
Absolutely. And I think you said a word there as well, intentional, just being a little more intentional about it. And, it's funny, Matt, in the book I wrote, I outlined 10 common characteristics of the entrepreneur. I see so many of them in you. I've heard the actual words uttered by you here. Some of them are being a problem solver. That's, first of all, I say every business is a solution to someone else's problem, right?
Yep.
But you're also going a little further, and you're helping teach people and guide people how to use storytelling as a way to problem solve as well. You also, even in your bio here, but I could see it in everything that you're doing. You mentioned being a curious person, and curiosity. Being curious and creative is one of the character traits that I outlined as well. You also mentioned, like I mentioned, intentional. That's one of the, just being intentional at everything, whether it's about your brand, whether it's about how you're going to use this Promethea, right? Whether it's about spending time in nature, on how you want to be intentional about that. Talking about meditation and reflection, that's being intentional. It's also, another character trait. It's being a lifelong learner as well, and being able to take some time to educate and reflect as well. So a lot of these great characteristics that you have, and one that I'll have to just say as well, you are a doer. You take immense action, and you have clearly shown that people, some of the most successful entrepreneurs, learn by doing. I mean, whether that was in lobbying, whether that was in digital marketing, whether that is taking on a show in nature, or even getting involved in taking an app in helping it learn more about our government and everything. I mean, all these sorts of things. I mean, these were not things that like you necessarily went to school for, or even were thinking you
Nor were
probably
the
ever
things
do,
that if
right?
you'd asked me 20 years ago, what I would be working on, that I would have had any, remote idea, right? 20 years ago, Matt would think that the stuff that today Matt is doing is insanely cool. And I have to remind myself of that on a pretty frequent basis, right? Because I mean, the days are long, but the years are short. And so eh, I have to remember that, like, 22-year-old and 25-year-old Matt would think that the stuff I get to do and see and interact with on a daily basis now is insanely freaking cool. And so I try every day to be appreciative of that. And some days I fail at that, and some days I succeed. But like it's important to remember that context moving forward. Like, yes, I've done interesting things in the past, and I'm going to do interesting things in the future. So like I get to I get to define what that role looks like. I'll kind of close with a story. Just since storytelling is at the heart of everything else. I mean, how the app even came about. So I told you I spent 2 years, with this idea in the back of my head, and then one day it just sort of clicked. Well, that day was back in November. My 4-year-old, or about to be 4-year-old son, brought home a miscellaneous set of viruses from school, and so my wife and I ended up with RSV and strep and all these fun things right before Thanksgiving. So we had to cancel a Thanksgiving trip we had planned, and that left us with a lot of time at home with unplanned things to do. So I just decided to kind of blow the dust off, this idea from the shelf and take a look at it, and was able to very quickly put together the exact pieces I needed to make it work. So, I mean, I didn't have all the skills in November that I needed to make this work, but I mean, we have a fully functional, almost ready to launch app that has been touched by no human at this point other than me. And I've used AI as a tool to help me do that. I've used, obviously, my experience in the industry to help me do that. But like the reality is, I mean, we're talking about 4 to 5 months. We've gone from zero to almost ready to launch on this app, and that's mainly because of intention, right? It's because like I had the time, so I set the intention to look at this, and then once it started working, I kept resetting the intention to focus on it. Like I would much rather be working on my show right now, right? Like I can assure you I would much rather be like working on making another network pitch, or doing something for the show. Like that creativity is my passion. But at the same time, building things is also my passion, and this idea needs to exist. Someone is going to be providing this service to the marketplace in the next 12 to 18 months, right? Like I'm damn near certain of that. What it is at this point is I want to be first to market, and I want to do it the best, and I think we can. And so I feel like, my business side feels like it has an obligation to do that and do it well before I get to focus on my television show, because I think this is a big deal.
It surely is. And by the way, that whole story, where you started, where you guys all got sick, you could have been bummed out. We missed going on a vacation trip and all this stuff, but instead you're like, well, we're home. We're going to use this time in a different way. And like you said, you dusted it off, and you were able to
And I'll
pull
be clear,
something
it was
else.
probably first about distraction, right? I don't know that I set out right at first to be intentional about it. It was like, oh yeah, here's this idea. And then once, like the technology is definitely in a place where we could do this. Then it was like, okay, if I want to do this, like it has to happen now, or someone's going to beat us to market. So let's do it. And at that point, it became very, very real.
Great. Well, Matt, this has all been amazing. All these different stories and all the things you're working on. And I mean, we're going to have you back again at some point, because I could just tell we're going to have more things to talk about, and we will follow you. So, speaking of following you, what is the best way people can follow you, your work, maybe connect with you?
Yeah, easiest way is just to go to my website at matthewfarrar.com, MATTHEWFARRAR.com. That's got links to my social platforms, but it's got links to my companies, my projects. So yeah, that's the easiest way to find me. You can send me a message, or just about any other way you want to connect with me.
Great. So MatthewFarrar.com. Visit him there. And actually, there's a lot going on there. So you'll see everything Matt's
You
up
can
to.
watch the trailer for the TV show. You can do all sorts of stuff.
I watched the trailer. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
And so you did a great job. Again, this is also somebody I have known almost 20 years about now. Met you, like you said, when you were a student at FSU, before I even lived in Tallahassee.
Mm-hmm.
And then, just to see you develop and evolve and do all these incredible things that I'm trying to keep up with. I should also tell everybody, speaking of storytelling, when Fearless Journeys, right before I launched this, I went into your studios there at Strategic Digital Services, and you guys helped guide me on how to create I don't know, maybe it was a 60-second video, but you told me something at the beginning of that a few weeks before, and you said, hey, write out your script practice it and see when you say it out loud, sound what it sounds like, but also how long it's going to be
Mhm.
and what visuals you want to be on the screen as you're talking. And I was like, oh my God, this is so much more than I thought about, So,
And
but
it's
it
funny
was,
because even though I hadn't put, even though I hadn't slapped terms and a presentation on it yet, like I was telling you to find the story, right? Like I was telling
yeah,
you to find the story even before that was what I realized was the core of most of the things I did.
yeah, you did. And so, first of all, I think just that actual practice of just doing it really made me think, oh, how can I make this more effective? What visuals do I need? What's funny is when you sent me that first, and I started I was like, where? I was trying to figure out how I'm gonna script this and whatever, and literally like the next week, I went on a volcano hike, in an active volcano hike in Guatemala, and I thought that it was going to be, a little bit strenuous, obviously, just doing the hike. But also that we were going to be on an active volcano. Like, hey, people go on there every day, but it's a little nerve wracking, right? Little did I know, Matt, that there was going to be a thunderstorm that would happen when we were on top of the mountain, when there's no covers anywhere to go. We have at least 2 hours to get back to base camp. And not only was it lightning, thundering, it was hailing on us. And I remember just being terrified. If you see any of the little videos I took, I put a little YouTube video up. You could just see it on my face. And also we had like 15 people in this group. A couple were my friends. The rest were people that were just on the tour with us. And I just kept thinking to myself, something's going to happen to one of us, and it's not going to be good. Because I'm just like, how could something not happen, right? With all of the stuff going on around us. But as terrified as I was, I had one thought in my head, and that was just keep moving forward. Just keep going back to base camp because there's nothing else to do. And it's not, being trapped in your fear is not going to do anything for you at this moment. You got to
Yeah,
get back home. You got to get back to base camp.
you
And
got it.
by that mantra coming at me for 2 hours on the rest of that hike and me thinking back about it, and then I went back a few days later to write that script, I said, man, that's it. That's the story. Let's tell the story of being on a volcano and all these things happening and how that translates to the journey of the entrepreneur. And all these things are going to happen that you don't expect, like getting sick maybe and missing vacation
Yeah.
time. But then just keep moving forward. And that's hopefully what we try to do. And entrepreneurs like you have inspired me to do that.
I thank you, man. Like but it's baked into your name, right? Like it's Fearless Journeys. It's baked in, and so my son turns 4 a week from today, as we're recording this, and one thing we talk with him a lot about is being scared and being brave, and this is dumbed down to a 4-year-old level, but at the end of the day, and this actually comes from a series of books that he loves called Pete the Cat. So I should not be attributed to this, but being brave means you're scared of something, but you do it anyway, right? Like that's what being brave is all about. That's what being fearless is all about. Not reckless, right? That's a whole different thing. But being brave, being fearless is about being scared of something or being nervous or unsure of something and deciding, being intentional to do it anyways. And so we had that conversation this morning with a 4-year-old. He has really itchy, watery eyes from all the pollen that's out, and I need to put eye drops in, and he doesn't like it. But we talked about the importance to be brave, and how I know he was scared, but that's how we do it anyways. And lo and behold, we got those eye drops in. And look, like that's dealing with a toddler, but I think the same principles apply to all of us, right? Like being brave, whether it's starting a business, whether it's going out on your first solo hike, whether it's climbing something that's higher than you've ever climbed before, being brave is about being a little bit scared and still being intentional to do it anyways.
Well, that's a great place to land this, I think, Matt. And I think you're right. And the other thing with being is also being able to teach it to others, like you taught it to your son. So because we all have to learn that and have examples like you. And so thanks so much for all you're doing in the space. Thanks for spending time with us here on the Agents of Innovation podcast. And just a reminder to everybody, if you haven't done so yet, go subscribe to the podcast, give us some comments, write us a review, like it. all that kind of stuff, and come visit us
The
over here at
best way you can help
fearlessjourneys.org.
Francisco's show, if you like Francisco, the best way you can help his show is to leave a rating and review on whatever platform you're listening on. Like, hands down, that is the best thing you can do to help expose his show to more people. So you should.
I appreciate it, Matt.
Yep.
And thanks for all you're doing. And
Thanks
thanks again for being an agent of innovation.
Thanks, man. Good to see you.